WADR, l'info chez vous.
WADR, promoting dialogue.
Good evening and many thanks for staying tuned to West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM and around the world on WADR.org. Welcome to Newslink. Here are the top stories. Senegalese Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko announces dialogue with trade unions next week to address their demands.
As the state, we are there to listen, to dialogue, to discuss, to supervise, but also to find solutions. We have set the 27th of next month as a date for launching the first social dialogue to reach a stability pact based on frank, sincere, and in-depth dialogue.
Benin mourns the death of the Minister of Secondary Education, and the extension of Niger's CNSP transition period by 5 years generates mixed reactions.
Nigerians have experienced discrimination, injustice, and looting for over 50 years. So, even if we give them 20 years, they will not be able to solve everything.
Meanwhile, Guinea-Bissau is set to host an ECOWAS high-powered delegation as President Embalo's mandate ends on February 27. Please stay tuned for details of these stories and more.
Here is Abdullahi Hassan with Newslink.
Many thanks for joining our broadcast and welcome to our listeners in the Gambia, Ghana, Liberia, Sierra Leone, and in Abuja, Nigeria via Democracy Radio. Tonight, Newslink opens right here in Senegal as Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko earlier came face-to-face with MPs at the National Assembly. Sonko appeared to provide updates and response to questions from parliamentarians on topical issues. The head of government entered the chamber around 4 p.m. and immediately began briefing the House, including on the recent report released by the Court of Auditors on financial mismanagement. Ousmane Sonko also returned to the social climate with the trade union demands. The Prime Minister announced a dialogue next week with the trade union centers to find answers to their demands.
The question posed by the Honorable Member Jakite stems from the publication of a report that has been widely circulated throughout Senegal and the world. It is a report that has caused a great deal of ink to flow, and what emerges from it is particularly catastrophic for this country, particularly worrying, and requires all of us Senegalese citizens to leap a real leap. Most Senegalese people, including those of today, are aware of what has happened in this country, but perhaps do not yet sufficiently understand what this means in terms of the responsibility of every one of us. In this country, which is a democracy, freedom of association has been established, and among these freedoms is the freedom of trade unions to defend their material and moral interests, and we fundamentally respect this right, which we will continue to promote, supervise, and enrich. That's why the best formula is to allow workers to organize themselves. As the state, we are there to listen, to dialogue, to discuss, to supervise, but also to find solutions. And we are working on this every day. We have set the 27th of next month as a date for launching the first social dialogue to reach a stability pact based on frank, sincere, and in-depth dialogue. What I mean by frank and sincere dialogue is that we, the government, unlike in the past, will hide absolutely nothing from the Senegalese people. All this will be put on the table, and all Senegalese will be able to assess the real capacities of their state so that they can make legitimate but also responsible demands.
Pour pouvoir asseoir en conséquence des revendications légitimes mais également responsables.
Senegalese Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko speaking there. Meanwhile, Benin and the government of President Patrice Talon are mourning the death of one of its political figures who died on Thursday. The Minister of Secondary and Technical Education and Vocational Training, Yves Chabi Koro, was killed in a road accident near Parakou, the main town in the north of the country. The Beninese police explained that the minister's car was traveling at high speed towards Parakou and attempted a faulty overtaking maneuver before colliding with a heavy-duty truck traveling in the same direction. Augustine Kole has more in this report.
One of the architects of the modernization of Benin's education system has just fallen to his death. Originally from the north of Benin, Minister Eva Chabi Kouaro had made reform of the secondary sector his top priority. He was one of the most active ministers in Patrice Talon's government. The Benin police explained that Eva Chabi Kouaro's car was traveling at high speed towards Parakou and attempted a faulty overtaking maneuver before colliding violently with a heavy-duty truck traveling in the same direction. The minister's bodyguard also died, while his wife, who was in the car, and his driver survived. The Union of Progressive Renewal, UPR, one of the political parties of which Chabi Kouaro is a member, deploys, and I quote, "This sudden death represents an immeasurable loss, both for the party and for the government of President Patrice Talon and the entire Beninese nation." End of quote. The UPR paid tribute to a man of great humility, regal, and dedication, known for his commitment to the development of Benin.
Augustine Kole filed that report. We now take you to the Sahel region, precisely in Niger, where the National Conference focused on the country's foundation concluded on Thursday with several proposals made by the subcommittees. Among these recommendations is the extension of the transition period by 5 years and dissolving all political parties. However, reactions from the population have been mixed since the conclusion of the conference. Civil society groups consider the proposed transition duration to be excessively long. Here are the reactions.
We believe that 5 years, if we have to count from the president's term of weeks, which we don't know when it will start, and frankly too long for a mandate. There should be laws to make it reasonable and acceptable, during which he can accomplish things, because he cannot do everything. The harm is too deep.
Nigerians have experienced discrimination, injustice, and looting for over 50 years. So, even if we give them 20 years, they will not be able to solve everything. Therefore, we will see what they can do with complete objectivity.
Reactions from Nigerians over the recommendations from the concluded National Conference.
More stories coming up on West Africa Democracy Radio. Newslink continues.
As a reminder, we are live on Facebook at WADR English Service and on YouTube at WADR. Now, Guinea-Bissau is set to welcome 2 high-powered delegations into the country on Sunday, February 23, 2025. The ECOWAS and United Nations Office for West Africa, UNOWA's envoys are arriving in Bissau in a tense context as President Omar Sissoko Embalo's mandate ends on February 27. They are programmed to meet with key political figures in the country. Imoradet has more.
The delegation, who will be led by Bagudu Hesse, former Minister of State for Foreign Affairs of Nigeria, he will be accompanied by Khalidou Traoré, Ambassador of Côte d'Ivoire to Nigeria, Babatunde Ajisomo, Special Assistant to the Head of Mission, Cherno Mamadou Diallo, former Senior Political Advisor to the UN, and Pabiram Sene, Senegalese Director of Elections. This visit comes as uncertainty grows in the country, with President Omar Sissoko Embalo's intention to remain in power until the inauguration of his successor after the election scheduled for October and November. The opposition, on the other hand, demands his departure on February 27, the anniversary of his inauguration 5 years ago. This high-level mission will conduct consultations with the government and political actors on the political and security situation in the country. This initiative, launched by the president of the ECOWAS Commission, Omar Touré, aims to support the effort of political actors and stakeholders towards a political consensus on the electoral calendar. Recall the Supreme Court had informed President Embalo on September 4, 2024, that his mandate will end on the 27th. The opposition, led by former Prime Minister Domingos Simões Pereira, demands the establishment of an interim president. The date for the future presidential election will be set at the end of March.
Imoradet reporting there. Elsewhere in Nigeria, phase 2 of the Support to Free Movement of Persons and Migration in West Africa project, commonly known as FMM2, has been launched. It was launched by the ECOWAS Commission in collaboration with United Nations agencies, IOM and ILO, and International Center for Migration Policy Development. The launch of FMM2 in Abuja marks a significant milestone in the region's efforts to enhance integration and migration governance. From Abuja, WADR's Usman Umar reports.
FMM2 builds on the successes of its first phase, launched in 2013 to enhance migration governance, facilitate mobility, and promote sustainable development across West Africa. With over 26 million euros in co-funding from the EU and ECOWAS, the initial phase supported migration data management, border control, labor migration, and counter-trafficking while engaging non-state actors and local authorities. At the launch, key speakers, including ECOWAS Vice President Demtian Chinchibija and EU Representative Mr. Massimo De Luca, emphasized the project's role in tackling migration challenges and improving livelihoods through effective policy and cooperation.
FMM2 will be instrumental in creating a region that is not only economically integrated, but also socially resilient, peaceful, and prosperous. The launch of this phase is also a call to action, a reaffirmation of our shared responsibility to address the migration challenges of the future with unity and determination.
And I know this is a phase 2, so we should know the task very well by now. Our implementing partners should be very acquainted with the terrain, and certainly they are. Our counterparts, our friends in ECOWAS, they certainly understand the size of what we are starting with this program. But let me say that the general context here in the region, in Europe and worldwide makes this task all the more relevant, all the more important for all of us.
For Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, Usman Umar reporting from Abuja.
In Ghana, public sector workers are rejoicing following a 10% rise in their salaries for the 2025 fiscal year. The John Mahama administration approved the adjustment under the single spine salary structure simultaneously with the National Tripartite Committee's agreement to increase the national daily minimum wage by 10%. The decision was reached after extensive negotiations between the government represented by the Fair Wages and Salaries Commission, the Ministries of Labour and Finance, alongside the Organised Labour. From Accra, Nadiri Tete reports.
Before this agreement, Finance Minister Dr. Kasiela Tuforsen had initially proposed an 8% increase. However, Organised Labour, which first demanded a 60% rise, later reduced its request to 35% before negotiations reached a stalemate. It took the intervention of President John Dramani Mahama to break the deadlock. He convinced the labour unions to accept a 10% increase and assured them of better economic prospects ahead.
We all knew the economy was in crisis. But some of the things I'm discovering myself has been a criminal handling of our economy. Ghana is a crime scene, actually, because how a government can have been so reckless, I cannot understand. But we're faced with a reality. And so I'll just appeal to you that let's tamper our demands for this year. And when the cake is big, then it's bigger. We'll share bigger.
A statement from the National Tripartite Committee (NTC) confirmed that the 10% increase in base pay under the single spine salary structure takes effect from January 2025. In addition to the salary increase, the national daily minimum wage has also been raised by 10%, bringing it to 19 cedis, 97 pesos, approximately a little over $1. Here is the Minister of Labour, Jobs and Employment, Dr. Rashid Pelpo, making the announcement.
An increase in the national daily minimum wage by 10% over the 2024 national daily minimum wage, which translates into a new national daily minimum wage of 19.97 Ghana cedis.
This new minimum wage will take effect from March 1, 2025. According to the government, the increase in both the minimum wage and base pay forms part of ongoing efforts to ensure fair compensation for workers while balancing economic stability and business sustainability. For WADR, Nadiri Tete, Accra.
You are listening to Newslink here on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM, Dakar, Senegal. Here's a reminder of our top stories. Senegalese Prime Minister Ousmane Sonko announces dialogue with trade unions next week to address their demands. Benin mourns the death of the Minister of Secondary Education. The extension of Niger's CNSP transition period by 5 years attracts mixed reactions. Guinea-Bissau set to host an ECOWAS high-powered delegation as President Embalo's mandate ends on February 27. Still ahead in the news, civil society in Liberia suggests the country redirect block salaries of some government officials into fighting anti-corruption. We also have the guest interview and sports news.
West Africa Democracy Radio. It's you speaking.
At a virtual conference organized by the West Africa Civil Society Institute, WACSI, on Thursday, various speakers emphasized the need for African civil society to innovate, adapt quickly, and work towards greater self-reliance in response to the funding cuts. Looking inward, exploring local resource mobilization and alternative funding mechanisms like social enterprise models are some of the recommendations posed to the regional government by civil society actors. Etia Tisu completes the story.
These recommendations are coming on the heels of the recent suspension of development aid by the United States, which has had profound implications for civil society across the region, affecting critical sectors such as health, education, governance and peace, and security. On the positive end, stakeholders opine that the freeze on funding to Africa serves as a wake-up call for the region to strengthen its capacity to mobilize and manage resources locally and effectively. One of the speakers, Madi Jobate, Executive Director of the Edward Francis Small Center for Rights and Justice, urged West African nations in particular to prioritize efficiency, reduce wasteful spending, and redirect resources toward critical sectors such as health, agriculture, and education.
I think it is high time African activists like us, African intellectuals, our politicians, our technocrats, our businesses, and Africans in general to cut the crap and we confront this issue, all right? Because aid is political. Look at right now what U.S. is doing. They said they are going to cut aid to South Africa because of the South African policy on land. You have a military coup, they cut off aid. You are a government that wants to challenge something, they cut off aid. So aid has been a political tool to control and dominate Africa.
Meanwhile, civil society organizations and funded projects in Liberia are already feeling the pinch, according to Eddie Jawolo, Executive Director, Neymot Partners for Democratic Development, who called for the redesigning budgets to cushion the impact of funding cuts.
A majority of the work we do in Liberia is supported by U.S. government system. Not only USAID, but the National Endowment for Democracy also just stopped supporting civil society in Liberia. So, like we have a car or gasoline, the car is not damaged. All we need to say, how do we get gas back into our car and keep moving? You can freeze your system, but you cannot freeze our dream.
Countries which will be most affected are those with a high burden of HIV, TB, and malaria, and those with large populations of refugee and internally displaced people.
Eche Atisu with that report. Following the news that some government officials have had their salaries blocked due to non-compliance with asset declaration requirements at the Semiamen, the executive director of the Center for Transparency and Accountability in Liberia has underscored the crucial need to redirect savings from those blocked salaries towards essential institutions, particularly the Liberia Anti-Corruption Commission. His call reflects a growing consensus on the importance of enhancing anti-corruption measures to promote a more transparent and accountable government.
Politics,
analysis on major news,
social matters, and all. This is a guest.
Our guest this evening is a Ghanaian economist, Dr. Evans Nuno, who joins us from Accra to discuss the recently approved pay rise for public sector workers in the country and other economic reforms to be undertaken by the government.
If you look at the current inflation now, it's really 3.5%. That is the current inflation. If inflation is 23.5% and you are increasing public sector salaries by 10%, in my view, that is not good enough. The reality is that the rise of inflation is not due to the fault of these workers. It could easily be due to mismanagement or probably negligence of political managers. So if you allow inflation to move from 10%, and I'm speaking before the pre-COVID era, even after COVID-19, we were below 20%. You allow it to get as high as 54% in 2022 and attempt to bring it down up to 23.5%. And you want to increase salaries by just 10%. So what happens to the extra 13%? Remember, you are not increasing salaries because you want to reward workers. You are compensating them for inflation. So though the nominal figure would have gone up, the real purchasing power of the people would have been worsened. So in my view, the minimum they could have done was to have increased it to 20% at least, though it wouldn't have been best because the best figure would have been to be at par with inflation or even higher than inflation. But if you cannot match it up to inflation, at least it should be close to it. This is less than half of it, which is unfair.
But other school of thought also say that this is a new administration. Even the administration itself is also lowering its expenses to show some commitment that, look, we are not in normal times, and so we all have to sacrifice and then contribute. You think the president himself, even meeting the labor unions, was not one that could actually send that clear communication?
No, you see, the president and his government obviously do have a point when they say because of the worsening condition of the economy or because of the poor financial situation of the economy, they are unable to increase it to any amount higher. They have a case, they are right, but that does not also make it right. I'm not too sure if I'm making sense, but the thing is, the fact that you have a problem and you cannot increase it to a certain level does not make it right. So the thing is that it is because of our economic situation. But I'm also saying that it is bad that people should be facing an inflationary figure of 23.5% only to be given a pay rise of 10%. It is unfair to them. But I also do understand where the president and the government are coming from. The fact that the previous government probably did not manage the economy well and we had to face this kind of inflation. So they are right. But if public sector workers are saying that it is low, they are also right. And I support the fact that it is low. The worst should have been that it should have been at par with inflation or at least 20%.
I know you've already said that the 10% increment is just like a stone thrown into the ocean. But as a country with the IMF, and that this year to next year would be our final year with the IMF, does this increment come as any shortfall to the IMF conditionalities?
Not really. If you look at the way the government is cutting down expenditure, it's a step in the right direction. The government is moving wisely. The few steps this government has taken obviously show that the government is aiming at achieving fiscal consolidation. The government is working so hard to make sure that it works within budget and reduces budget deficit. And that is in consonance with the IMF conditionalities and all or whatever we can talk about. So I think that their actions so far are okay in connection with the IMF deal. Now, the 10%, if you look at how much inflation we are doing, I'm not too sure the IMF staff would have problems with that because ordinarily it would have been an insult for people who are facing inflation of 23% to be given just 10%. But yes, now Mahama has the will of the people, has good will of the people. They do understand that the economy is not in the best of shape.
Dr. Evans Nuno is a Ghanaian economist. Up next is sports news with Sankule Janko.
Hello there, warm welcome and thank you for joining us. The stage is set for the knockout phase of the 2024-25 CAF Champions League, following the quarter-final and semi-final draws conducted by the Confederation of African Football CAF on Thursday, 20 February 2025. The defending champions Al Ahly SC of Egypt face Sudan's Al Hilal SC in what promises to be a high-stakes encounter. Al Ahly, 12-time winners of the competition, aiming to become the first club to claim the title 3 seasons in a row according to CAF official website, side. Pyramids FC, the Egyptian side, will face Moroccan giant AS FAR, led by Portuguese coach Alexander Santos. In another mouth-watering clash, South Africa's Mamelodi Sundowns will take on Esperance Sportive de Tunis of Tunisia. Sundowns, winners in 2016, are aiming to break their semi-final barrier, having failed to progress beyond that stage since their title win. The final quarter-final match will see MC Alger of Algeria take on South Africa's Orlando Pirates. Pirates, the 1995 champions, top their group with 14 points and are looking to reach the semi-finals for the first time since finishing as runners-up in 2013. MC Alger under Tunisian coach Khalid Ben Yahia, the competition's meanest defense. Following the quarter-final draw, the semi-final draw was also determined. The CAF official website reports the winner of clash between Mamelodi Sundowns and Esperance will face either Al Ahly or Al Hilal. Meanwhile, the victor between MC Alger and Orlando Pirates will meet the winner of the Pyramids versus AS FAR tie. All quarter-final matches will be played over the two legs, with first leg scheduled for 1 April and the return leg a week later on 8 April. Semi-finals will follow a similar format, with the winners advancing to the prestigious final in June 2025. And that's it for sports. It's back to you.
Sports was brought to you by Sankule Janko. And with that, we've come to the end of this edition of Newslink on West Africa Democracy Radio, broadcasting on 94.9 FM Dakar, Senegal. Thank you for listening, and many thanks to Maudio Juf and Sheikh Njai for the technical assistance. Do interact with us via social media platforms: X, Instagram at WADR English, on Facebook, WADR English Service. We are also live on WADR.org. Coming up at the bottom of the hour is a security and governance program in the Sahel. I am Abdullah Hassan. Good evening.
And many thanks to you for listening to Newslink via Hot 104.3 FM.